I am pleased to present Maoi Arroyo, our next panelist. Maui is a serial entrepreneur, impact investor, and educator. In 2018, she became the founder and principal of the Ignite Impact Fund, the first fund focused exclusively on eradicating poverty in the Philippines. She currently sits on the Global Future Council of the World Economic Forum on SDG or Sustainable Development Goals Investment. Her entrepreneurship career began when she co-founded Hybridime, I hope I pronounced it right, the pioneer innovation consulting firm in the Philippines. The firm has created 3,500 jobs in the last 15 years. She is also a co-founder of a social enterprise that supplies pasteurized eggs to 5 major hotels, a fashion brand that upcycles leather jackets into bags, a media company that promotes independent Filipino films, and a property development firm. And she was named as one of the World Economic Forum's Young Global Leaders of 2015. Maui is also an adjunct professor at the Asian Institute of Management, where she teaches innovation and entrepreneurship. She obtained her master's degree in bioscience enterprise from the University of Cambridge and her biology degree from the University of the Philippines. And she will talk to us today on sustainable development goals and impact investing via Ignite. We're eager to hear from you, Maui.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for inviting me, Rotary District 3830. Thank you, Raisa and Prof. Sunny, for inviting me as well. So I'm going to be talking today about how can everybody hear me, by the way?
Yes.
Zoom is like a seance sometimes. Are you there? So could we bring up my slides, please? I can tell you more about what impact investing is. Okay, next slide. Thank you, Elmer. So the first question everybody asks me is, when do you think we'll be able to go back to normal? And I always return with the question, why would we want to do that? The old normal wasn't working. If you look at ASEAN, even though we were in 2018, prior to the pandemic, we were voted as the first country we should invest in a study by Wharton. We were the second fastest growing economy in the world after China. And yet we're also second to the last in terms of poverty in ASEAN. I mean, thank God for Laos, otherwise you would be dead last. And I always say we don't really have a right to be poor. The net present value of our marine biodiversity is 556 million US dollars annually. And we are the center of marine biodiversity. And on land, we have about 36 million. We're third after the Amazon and the Indonesian rainforests. So we really, if we harness that sustainably, the UN estimates that figure will actually increase by 74%. So we actually should be able to eradicate poverty in the Philippines within our lifetimes. Next slide, please. So I always say that we cannot afford to go back to normal. When people talk about, are you funding the bottom of the pyramid? We don't have a bottom of the pyramid in our country. We're like Shakira. We have hips that don't lie. We have a very big hip country, and the big hip, the 61% of our population is what we call the political poor. They're the political poor because they have voters' IDs, and so the mayors pay attention to them. So they're generally what we would call the masa. And then, of course, you have the poorest of the poor. These are ninjas, no income, no job, no assets, right? So obviously, you don't give loans to ninjas. 68% of the poor in this country are farmers and fisher folk, as Ayesha, who is always a pleasure to be on a panel with Ayesha, has isolated as well. Aside from, I would say, our social inclusiveness, we're also not giving nature enough time to recover. The last time our country had enough resources for everybody, for each Filipino was 1963. Ever since 1963, we have been in ecological debt. We are taking more from nature than we are allowing nature to grow back or to regenerate. This is a recipe, obviously, for utter disaster. Next slide, please. So, what I decided to do when I founded Ignite Impact Fund was to be in the middle of financial investing where you want to make as much money as you can and you hope you don't harm people or the environment. Um, and philanthropy where you want to help people and you don't really care so much if you make money. On the left side, you know, if you wanted to invest in a venture capital fund that would find the next Google or the next Facebook, you would be getting they would target to make 6 times your money in 6 years or 35% internal rate of return. On the other side, when you invest with people like Ayesha, what the return she would give you is a tangible, measurable impact, right? I believe there it's possible to invest in companies that profit with a purpose. And so our fund targets to make you 3 times your money in 6 years or 15% IRR and at the same time a tangible, measurable impact. And if you're wondering why 3 times your money or 15% IRR, there was a study done by Nexus, which is a group of millennial. I think the term now is geriatric millennial, although I find that so insulting. But okay, millennial family office members around the world, and they discovered that the thing to prevent the shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves phenomenon, which is the first generation makes the money, the second generation grows the business, and the third generation blows the money away. The internal rate of return you need for that is about 15%. Next slide, please. So we are an American fund, and I founded the fund in America because I wanted to have global standards for compliance. We're an American fund that only invests in the Philippines. We don't invest anywhere else. We invest to achieve the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And of course, they have to comply with our metrics. Next slide. And one of the things, and my biology background helps provide this, is because the World Economic Forum has shown that 70% of the 169 SDG targets can be supported by technology and innovation, except that the three goals that matter the most to us, no poverty, life underwater, and life on land, have the lowest number of sort of fourth industrial revolution applications. So we need more innovations in these spaces. And especially now during the pandemic, you definitely need good health and well-being. In a way, the pandemic is somewhat of a blessing because before it was like, oh, you're so sweet, Maui, you care about the poor, you care about the masses, and then they pat me on the head. But now you realize that when a huge amount of your population has to choose between starvation and safety, a better life for them actually means safety for your family, right? Because none of us are safe until all of us are safe. Next slide, please. So how do we invest at Ignite? Well, our metrics are 70% business. So it has to be making a profit. That's because a bankrupt firm serves no one. No cash, no gas. And then 30% social impact. We either buy shares of these companies or give them loans that can convert to shares. And in 7 to 10 years, these companies either repay the loan with interest, or they're sold to a much bigger company, or they IPO on the Philippine or Singapore Stock Exchange. And then our investors make money. Next slide, please. We like to think of the SDG goals like a wedding cake. And at the core of the base is no poverty, with of course the biosphere. And this will probably echo Ayesha's experience, because every time I went to a coastal community and said, please don't dynamite fish the coral reefs because it's your heritage for humanity, think about your grandchildren, they would just turn to me and say, yeah, but what am I going to feed my children tomorrow? Right? So solving poverty and at the same time um, having an environmentally friendly and sustainable solution um, is actually at the core first of helping the country. And if you achieve that, you will then achieve better education because they won't be malnourished. Um, you have you have all the societal goals, and then when you have the biosphere in society, you will then achieve all of the economic goals. Um, our system actually uh, complies with IRIS. IRIS is a global standard, which because we're awash with standards in the world with Moody's and Fitch, and everybody's coming out with an impact standard. But this aligns with over 50 standard bodies. So our metrics are compliant with that. Next slide, please. Thank you, Elmer. And I mentioned doing, I mentioned investing in the Philippines, and where we really want to invest is the green and blue hexagon. So modernizing agriculture and mariculture because 68% of our people are farmers and fisherfolk. And when we also look at infrastructure such as broadband internet, and I'll talk about that in a little while. And eventually, as the fund grows, we'd like to go to the creative and cultural industries because they create a sense of they create a sense of us or pagkakapwa. Kapwa is the shared inner self. It's the core of Filipino psychology, which is why in our language we don't have a word for hello. We know each other through story and cuento and metaphor. No? And it's so important to us as a people and as a culture. When you ask where in the Philippines does Ignite want to invest, we have a list of companies here on the right, and it's going in a gradient from blue to green because Mimaropa, so that's Palawan, is where most of our marine resources are. And then all the way down to CAR, which is the only landlocked region, right? So the Cordillera Autonomous Region. So these are the places we want to invest. You will note that none of them says NCR plus. We, we do want to invest in the rest of the Philippines because we feel that there's a lot of deeply undervalued assets there. Next slide. How do we invest in these areas? We use a system called Community OS. This is the system developed by Dr. Sixto Calao Rojas, who, is often referred to as the banker. He was doing development banking before it was called development banking. Um, and his system has proven effective at poverty eradication in the Philippine context since the 1980s. It's an economic management system and a dashboard that balances average household income, ecological footprint, that's ecological expense, and biocapacity. Biocapacity is ecological income or how quickly nature regenerates. We know it works. I guess the most recent example I can give you is DBF Dairy. If you buy their Carabao milk, they achieved zero poverty in the town of Talavera in Nueva Ecija. Um, as of this date, the communities of San Jose del Monte and the entire Bangsamoro Autonomous Region of Muslim Mindanao have been mapped. And when I say mapped, it means that I can tell you in San Jose del Monte that they uh, export, so they sell outside of their community 40 million pesos worth of pork. However, they import 140 million pesos worth of pork products. So tocino, longanisa, bacon. So clearly the thing to do is to put up slaughterhouses and processing businesses there. And I can tell you exactly where to put it. I mean, the location, the GPS location. I can tell you how many TESDA hired butchers we have to educate. So the big data actually helps a lot in terms of our impact strategy. This community OS is now being used by NEDA, and it's being taught at the Development Academy of the Philippines. Next slide, please. So, this is supposed to be an animation. I was going to show you the canvas, but the canvas is super complicated. That's why we're partnered with Unity. Unity makes games like Pokemon Go. My Rotaractors know this, Pokemon Go and Overcooked. And this is a screenshot from something like SimCity. This is what we want to see. We don't need to see the back end of it. We do want to know where the hunger is, where people are connected to water, where the power is, waste management, access to protection like fire and police and health. No, and other cultural specializations. So the idea is to map the entire country. Next slide. The funds run by myself and two other American gentlemen. Dave Polai, if you ever bought something from TV, it's his fault because he's the founder and former president of the Home Shopping Network. Joel Momberger has been commercializing technology throughout Asia, mostly in Singapore and Hong Kong, and worked at Oracle for a long time. And we have 40 years experience jointly in commercializing innovations and developing new ventures. Next slide, please. We do have very important partnerships. So we're partnered with CIMB. That's the second largest bank in Malaysia. It's an ASEAN Universal Bank, and they enable our investees or our companies to list on the Singapore Stock Exchange if they decide to sponsor that company. Of course, we're partnered with the Rojas Calao Foundation for community OS data, and with the Asian Institute of Management, because their supercomputer donated by Acer is the only computer big enough to crunch all that data. And with you, we're solidifying our partnership with UNDP Philippines because we'd like to validate our social impact so that it continues over multiple political administrations. Next slide, please. Okay, so that's a very quick overview of what we do. I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much, Maui. Perhaps one question in the minds of our Rotarians in the audience. How can they adopt your model of impact investing to perhaps to earn some profit, but with a purpose, and secondly, as a Rotary Club, to have measurable, impactful projects? Could you care to share some tips for our Rotary clubs on launching similar projects?
Sure. I think I actually have slides for that question. Elmer, can you go? I think that was going to be question 3.
Go back one slide. Yeah.
Sorry, go back one slide. This one? Okay, so I'll answer this question first, Raisa.
Yes, because the sequence of the slides, yeah.
Okay, so Warren Buffett recently said that businesses should focus on making profits. I don't want to disagree with Warren Buffett. Well, I do want to disagree. I just don't want to be disrespectful to Warren Buffett. He's like the cuddly grandpa of capitalism. But this is the old model where you work really hard and then afterwards you give back to society. I actually think we should start investing in businesses that don't take away in the first place. A good example, next slide, please. A good example is Invested. So they provide non-collateral student loans. They've done 40 million pesos worth of loans to date. Their loans are for tuition, laptop, which is a huge thing now for during the pandemic, thesis and allowance student loans. They have 1,007 student borrowers. Their repayment rate to their investors is 100%, and they only have a 4% default rate from their student borrowers because most of them you wait to collect until they've graduated. Next slide, please. Most importantly, you're seeing a huge increase in average household income. And since many of them are the first to go to college, plus they give counseling about financial literacy, and they do help place them in jobs. So their pandemic average is about 60 days. Prior to the pandemic, it was about 30. So when Warren Buffett says you should focus on making a profit, we like to invest in companies like Invested because you cannot separate the profit from the impact, right? This is very much like the trivia. If you serve, the more people you serve, the more money you will make. And so this is very in line with the philosophy of Rotary, right? So that's my answer to that question.
Okay, thank you, Ma'am.
is there a next slide?
Uh,
Sorry, Raisa.
yeah, Elmer, can you play the next slide? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So, which is why when we look at the average, what we can do, people who invest all around the world and people who invest all throughout ASEAN, Ignite is really right smack in the middle. We're very much at par, um, and we're currently trying to go around the um, Philippine crowdfunding rules so that you can invest as low as $1,000. But right now, the minimum is like $25,000 to invest in our fund. Next slide, please. Sorry, should I answer this question, Raisa?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. Um, so let me give you concrete examples of current impact investments that are doing well. Next slide. Elmer, next slide, please. Thank you. So we have $500,000 invested in the fund in March 2021. We then invested in two companies, Quicksilver Satellite Ventures, which is a national satellite broadband company, and Plentina, which is like a mobile credit card. So buy now, pay later. Plentina has around 30,000 users. We have several companies in the due diligence phase, which I'll talk about. Next slide. So Quicksilver actually is in the business of putting satellite broadband level internet so that we don't have internet problems. So right now they're laying down nodes. Each node has a radius of 10 to 30 kilometers. So if I put a node in, say, Camp Aguinaldo, if you live in Pateros, your internet will be so much faster. Which is important because the only country with slower internet than us is Afghanistan, and we should be ashamed of that, even though we're a mobile first country. So they're currently partnered with all the 7-Elevens, all the military bases, all the public schools, all the libraries, and all the courts, so that you will blanket the country with internet because each of these will have nodes. Next slide, please. So every 10% of broadband penetration equals a 1.1% increase in GDP. And every 1% increase in household income equals 3% reduction of proportion of people in poverty. Part and parcel of the nodes is also the concept of a life certificate. That way, all of your social security, whether you got vaccinated or not, everything can be tracked in the life certificate. We're also trying to work with the Catholic Church for baptism certificates and all these other things. So it's very robust. Next slide. In Cebu, however, we're also investing in we're also looking to invest in GEMS, Green Environmental Management Systems. It's the world's first mango waste biorefinery. So they take the peel and the seed and they refine it into pectin, which makes gummies gummy, and polyphenols, which is an antioxidant, so pampabata. And they go in bulk from 600 to 1,200 US dollars per kilo. The medium products are like mango butter, which is not only good for eating, but also good for beauty. And beauty is always such a great market. Next slide, please. On the marine side, we're looking at the Palawan Coral Real Estate Investment Trust. So basically, the corals, when you farm them, all you have to do is leave them alone. You don't need fertilizer. They will increase the income of coastal communities by at least 10%, where 10 times, where the average household currently lives in coastal communities on 1,000 pesos a month or 75 cents a day. Thank you. So I just wanted to give you a quick overview.
Okay, thank you, Maui.